I'm acknowledging the catastrophe of the normalization of single parenthood in African America, as if 48 hours a day of adult supervision time were not twice as many as 24 hours a day.
Right.
As if adolescent boys and girls were not fundamentally different in their emotional developmental arc, and that the bipolarity of male and female child rearing were not fundamental to getting the socialization of the male and the female children on track. As if the disciplinary supervision of a father were not fundamental in keeping a kid from choosing a gang as his polar point of contact for expressing his masculinity. Discipline, as if that didn't matter, and the ability to sustain it within a household, as if two wages weren't better than one. I've grown weary of arguing with these people as this slow-moving train wreck, which Moynihan called attention to more than a half century ago, weren't unfolding before my very eyes. I was just sitting here imagining a kindergarten somewhere in a nice lily-white suburb, and a school shooter who goes in and shoots up 3 or 4 of those kids and blows their brains out. They're 5 years old, they're 7 years old. And what the nation would be doing in the aftermath of that, everything from the control of firearms to the psychological services available and whatnot. And you're right, the carnage is almost unbearable. I mean, it's unbelievable, it's almost unbearable. I haven't done anything systematic like you've done, but just perusing the newspaper, I opened one of my speeches with this in Chicago. I just went and took a report for the Memorial Day weekend, and there were 72 shootings, 68 homicides, whatever, and I just read it off, because I mean, we ought to actually stop and ponder sometimes the savagery. You break down the civilization, you say, and you mention the family, and I want us to talk about that a little bit, because why, are these things happening? And the political framework where, as you say, these things are not drawing national attention because they're blacks killing blacks, and that doesn't fit the narrative. But I'll come back to that. You're indicting the social organization of these communities, the parents, the families, the values, the norms, you say, a breakdown in civilization. Whose fault is that?
Whose fault? Boy.
Is that the wrong question?
Well, it's a difficult question. I think the first step is simply to acknowledge that there's a problem, and then start thinking about what sort of values need to be revalorized, to use a disgusting academic term, to change that. Again, historical causes, I don't know it, but at some point, I mean, it would be good if we could get the left to even acknowledge family breakdown. If it then wants to blame slavery exclusively for it, that would be a step in the right direction, at least. At some point, though, I would say, again, pace my earlier remarks, looking to historical causes may be in some sense accurate, but at some point, it's up to a culture to take account and responsibility for itself. But I remember, Deborah Dickinson has pointed out years ago when I was mentioning family breakdown, just the very complicated relations between males and females in the Black community. And I think that's right. And it's a very tough thing to try and figure out how to fix. I remember doing a ride along in Chicago with this gorgeous Black cop. And he had a stable job, was going to have a great pension, but he had kids by several different mothers and was married to none of them. And that's not, I don't think that is an abusive relationship, but there's real complexity there that I have no ability, knowledge to comment on, but fixing what has become now the pattern of, which you know as well as I do, of multi-partner fertility, where any given female may have children by several different males, and any given male may have children by several different females. That's just a recipe for very, very tragic childhoods.
Yeah,
And
the economist Robert Cherry has actually been writing a little bit about this. and I've multiple partner paternity, and we don't want to traffic in stereotypes here. We'll be accused of doing that. Of course, it's a complex situation, and this is not a typical arrangement for Black child rearing, although the relative frequencies are much higher, and that does matter.
Well, out of wedlock birth rate certainly is
Yes,
is
that has
is
become the
typical.
norm. We're talking 70%.
71, yeah.
71, I stand corrected by the lady who's close to the data. Um, and then people will, you know what they're going to say. They're going to say there are alternative arrangements, and the sociologists are not going to line up uniformly behind the causal argument that the family structure actually is related to the outcomes. They're going to have their own arguments because they're hopelessly corrupted. They are, I'm sorry, by the uh, ideology of avoiding victim blame as they understand it at all costs. This is Moynihan. This is an old story. Um, I agree with you once again, Heather, that I think the family is the key. And I think gender relations or inner male female, however you want to call it, dynamic within African American culture are to some degree troubled. The abortion rate amongst Black women is extraordinarily high, for instance, another indicator of out of wedlock births and single parenthood and all of that. I've almost given up trying to have this argument with people because it's a kind of implacable wall of hostility. They'll say that you're saying that Black people are inferior. I'm sure that I'm going to be attacked and vilified, for the cowardly and self-hating agreement with you about this, because they're going to say you're saying there's something wrong with Black people. That's exactly what Ibram Kendi says. That's exactly what Ta-Nehisi Coates says. There's something. Why are you saying there's something wrong with Black people? And this idea that we can fix it. How can we fix it when 300 years of white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera? To which I have an answer, which is nobody is coming to save you. Point one,
Right.
you have no alternative but to address yourself to this matter. Do you want to live in dignity, or do you want to be a permanent ward of the beneficence of white liberals who, by the way, give them enough time and they'll change their mind about the whole thing? I mean, that's my argument. I'm acknowledging the catastrophe of the normalization of single parenthood in African America, as if 48 hours a day of adult supervision time were not twice as many as 24 hours a day
Right.
of adult,
Right.
as if adolescent boys and girls were not fundamentally different in their emotional developmental arc, and that the bipolarity of male and female child rearing. No, I'm not ruling out same-sex marriages here, but I'm talking about the norm. I'm talking about the fat part of the distribution. We're not fundamental to getting the socialization of the male and the female children on track. As if the disciplinary supervision of a father, we're not fundamental in keeping a kid from choosing a gang as his polar point of contact for expressing his masculinity. Discipline, as if that didn't matter, and the ability to sustain it within a household, as if two wages weren't better than one, etc. I mean, so I've tired, I've grown weary of arguing with these people as this slow moving train wreck, which Moynihan called attention to more than a half century ago, weren't unfolding before my very eyes.
And let me just say, of course, that the white underclass has massive problems as well. And you've got, this is what something Charles Murray warned about,
Yeah.
the rising illegitimacy rate there too. And
Yeah.
the usual pathologies will follow in its wake. So it's not as if American culture overall is doing really great when it comes to marriage at this point, although the white overall marriage out of wedlock birth rate is now about 27%. So it's still, nearly 2/3 less than blacks, but it's rising, and that's a problem. And the demonization of males is something that goes across the culture. I'm not so sure that that's so relevant in Black culture, though. The kind of feminist hatred of masculinity and the traditional male virtues. But your point about boys needing fathers, Alice Goffman, who wrote the daughter of Irving Goffman, who
Yes,
wrote On the
I know her
Runabout.
well. She's a friend.
And she was canceled eventually, I think, by Pomona. But before that happened, her book chronicles a family of crack dealers in West Philadelphia. And one of the brothers says to her, well, the reason I turned out well is because my father came around every so often when I was growing up. He being merely a crack dealer that used, an armed crack dealer that uses weapons, whereas his younger brother, according to this older brother, called him a stone cold robber, was just absolutely a sadist and engaged in just really even more outrageous violent street crime. And the older brother's explanation was that his father never came around. And is it Tupac Shakur or some rapper that also said, I didn't have a father. So, and you can talk to people. I've talked to people. I've spent time writing about prisons, and I've been inside prisons. And there's some surprising moments of seeming acknowledgement of personal responsibility. And you never know with prisoners of any race
If
whether
they're
they're
playing
bullshitting
you.
you or not.
Yeah, they're
And
playing
they
you.
can often be bullshitting you until, they know what you want to hear.
Yeah.
But I have heard people say that the lack of fathers is definitely a problem. So
No, there's plenty of tests. I just want to be clear. This book by Alice Goffman is On the Run.
right.
So we get that in the notes so people will know if they're interested in following up on that. An ethnography where she is deeply embedded with young men in the inner city in Philadelphia and understanding their interaction with cops as they seek to evade being captured because they have warrants out.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately a very left-wing book. She says it's really all the criminal justice system problem. I disagree with that, but it has some interesting.
Well, I just have to say here, I love Alice Goffman. I've known her since she was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin. She is an extremely talented ethnographer. She happens also to be a white woman, and she has taken way more flack from the academic patrons who defend their little corner of the Black Studies department from how dare a white woman go whatever, but she's profoundly insightful. And she has her politics. They're not my politics, but I still love her.